Welcome to Greek for a Week. I'm glad that you're looking at this week's video as we continue to work through 1 Peter. This week we are looking at chapter 3 verses 18 through 22. So in just a moment I will diagram this passage to see how everything fits together. But you'll notice here that Peter has used the relative pronoun in a few of the verses to tie it to the preceding verse. So we'll see how that takes place. And when we get to the end, we'll see how this hati might help us in a preaching or teaching outline. So we'll see some of those connections. Verse 18, he says, because Christ also once died with reference to sins. And of course, the righteous there is Christ, and the unrighteous would be us. The purpose for dying is so that he might bring you and me to God. How is by having been put to death, participle of means, and by having been made alive. So each of those come back to that he might bring you to God. It's how he has made that happen. And then by which, so the Spirit here, having been made alive in the Spirit, by which, so that's the means by which he made the proclamation to the disobedient spirits in prison, which we get to in verse 20, who were. So this is an attributive participle. They were disobedient. So these spirits here that he made proclamation to were disobedient when the patience of God was eagerly waiting in the days of Noah. So this would be a temporal marker here. This would be a temporal marker here. And then another temporal participle while constructing an ark. Now the ark will continue to be further defined in the next phrase here, in which a few, that is 8 souls, were saved. So the ark was the means by which these 8 souls were saved, or you could say it was the instrument that the 8 souls found themselves in through the means of water. So this water now, this representation of water is also seen down here in verse 21, which also is an antitype that now saves you. That is baptism. But he'll make some qualifiers with that. Not the removal of the dirt of the flesh, strong contrast here, the Allah, but the appeal of a good conscience to God through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So the resurrection of Jesus Christ is the means by which you are saved. Verse 22, Jesus Christ, relative pronoun, who is at the right hand of God, having gone, there's another temporal participle, having gone into heaven and having been subjected to him. And who has been subjected to him? The angels, the authorities, and the powers. So before we move on to the outline, let me just say that really 18 through 22, so basically this paragraph 18 through 22 is really all subordinate to the main paragraph of 13 through 17, all because of the word hati that provides us the relationship. So let's see how that relationship takes place. Remember, he brought the concept of who is it that's going to harm you in verses 13 and 14, especially if you're doing good. Well, he gives them some commands. Do not fear. Do not be troubled. Rather, what do I want you to do? What's the emphasis of 13 through 17? Is I want you to sanctify the Lord Christ in your hearts by being ready to give a defense of your hope, doing it with gentleness and fear. So this is how you are to do it. And then why? So that no one can accuse you. You could say, why else should I sanctify the Lord Christ? Well, why? Because Christ also suffered. That's this entire paragraph. And because Christ also suffered, he was put to death, he was made alive, and he has gone into heaven. So my suggestion is, if you were to work through this text, I think you would have to break it down into 13 through 17 and 18 through 22. But you will also need to make sure that you demonstrate the relationship between these two paragraphs, really using the word hati here so that you can see the connection with the overall imperative and concern that Peter has for the original recipients as they suffer. Yeah, I trust this has been helpful. It's been a little bit difficult to pull all of this together for the very reason that there's a couple of paragraphs here, and it's a little bit overwhelming if we see it all as one paragraph, but I wanted to make sure I showed you the connections. Have a great week. We will move on to chapter 4, and we'll keep moving through 1 Peter. Have a great week.